Morning, everybody. So again, you've heard from Dr. Juanes Ramirez. He's our Spanish service representative for our state. And my name is Tamika. I'm one of the CFNC representatives. I usually cover the sort of Charlotte and surrounding areas. One of the things, hope you guys are familiar with CFNC, but of course we are kind of this comprehensive website. So we have lots of resources. If you haven't been, definitely go visit our website. We can go on to the next one. It's just so we have so much to cover. One of the things I want to kind of mention here, of course, all of our regional representatives, we have social media pages. So we also try to share a lot of things that maybe you can share on your social media pages. So definitely join and follow us on social media, because there may be something that you might want to post on your pages. We all definitely have Facebook and Instagram pages. So usually our names, it's usually our first name at CFNC, would it be how it would be on Facebook and Instagram. And so definitely follow us on those social media contacts or whoever your regional representative is. And also visit YouTube, because we put a lot of information out there. So a lot of webinars that we do, all of that will be on the YouTube channel. So definitely be sure to follow us on social media. And we're going to kind of jump into this because we don't have a whole lot of time. And I know you guys have some tricky situations that are going on. Prior to working with CFNC, I actually worked in financial aid for 6 years at public and private schools. So I can't even tell you the number of scenarios there are. I pretty much have heard everything. And you have to know that we're all kind of flawed individuals. So there's always going to be tricky situations when it comes to financial aid. So we're going to jump into this. How I'd like to do it is I'm just going to pause and allow you to kind of think about it just for the sake of time, because we do have some that we're going to be talking about just for students who are sort of documented, and those students and U.S. citizens. And then Juanes will start to cover some of the other areas that we'll get there. So we'll pause a little bit for you to think about it. If you want to throw an answer, what you think in the chat, definitely do that. We're going to kind of pause just for a second and then move on to the next scenario. But this will also give you more time to ask questions at the end. So if we don't address your scenario, you can ask some questions. So our first scenario, of course, is about Reggie. So Reggie grew up in Georgia with his biological mom, Barbara. In late 2019, she married Reggie's stepmother, Gwen. And so Barbara, Gwen, and Reggie have relocated to North Carolina. When Reggie completes the FAFSA, though, in North Carolina, what parental information is he required to include? So I kind of paused here to give you a chance to say, oh, y'all are quick too. People said both, and that's absolutely right. We're going to go ahead. Let's go and do the answers since y'all were so quick with your answers. Reggie is required to include both parents' information since they do live in the same household and are legally married. So yes, he would put both parents' information on the FAFSA. So that's a good scenario just to know. And just know too that parents do not have to be legally married now. If there are two parents in a home, they do not have to be legally married. If there are two adults or parents in the home, they have to report both of those parents. So that's a good scenario there. Let's go on to the next one. So Jaden's a senior. He's been living with his grandmother since he started high school. This is a popular scenario. So you can use all kinds of situations with this. His parents never married. His father is incarcerated. He sees his mother occasionally. She's unfortunately on drugs right now. So he kind of sees her maybe once a week. But most of his time is spent with his grandmother. So he stays at his grandmother's home. His grandmother didn't go through the legal kind of courtship. You know how that goes in families. He's just living with his grandma. His grandma's going to make sure he's okay. But she didn't go through the court system. How can he proceed in filling out the parent information on the FAFSA, knowing this is the situation that they're dealing with? I'll pause here a second, give you a chance to think about it. Okay. And I see some of you have put in some of the right answers, and that's absolutely right. Let's kind of pull up that again, Juanes. I don't know if it's showing. So he has a couple of options here. One of them is option one is probably the easiest, right? Because this is the one he does know where his mother is. The general rule with financial aid is that if they're under the age of 24, they're required to put parent information on the form. There are some exceptions, but that's the general rule. And so what most financial aid offices will do is if the student has contact, they may not live with that parent, they may not know where that parent is all the time, but if they have contact, and they know where their parent is, the financial aid office is going to want that parent's information. It also makes it easier for the student to have to just put that parent's information on there. If that parent is unstable, as his mother is in this scenario, they probably don't have stable employment. They probably don't have any income coming in. So it's not going to hurt the student to put that information on there because there's no income they're reporting. They're just making it easier for them to process the form. They're putting the mother's kind of name and information on there, but no income is being reported. So it's going to make it easier. Now, if the student wanted to, they do have a second option where they can actually appeal to be independent. Now, of course, if a student goes through this process, this is going to be a little bit lengthy. So what they do is they pretty much, before they get to the parent section on the FAFSA, there's a question right before you get to the parent section that asks, are you going to report parent information? They can just say, no, I'm not going to report parent information. What this does is it triggers a message to the financial aid office. So they get a flag on their FAFSA application, basically. And it shows that the student did not report any parent information. This makes the financial aid office either ask them a question about, we're going to need some more documentation from you because of your age, you need parent information. Then the student can start explaining why he didn't report parent information. This process can last a little while because they're going to ask for lots of documentation, usually at least from 3 people who know about the situation. So probably somebody at the school, a parent, someone that maybe the grandmother. This kind of goes on for a couple of weeks. So it's a lot of back and forth, which is why I always encourage students to go with option 1 if they at least know where the parent is. But if they don't, and they like to try to be appealed and they don't want to have to try to locate their parent every year during this time period, they can do that at independent appeal. So they have that option. And so you can let them know that if you don't want to do this, let's just say no to reporting parent information on the FAFSA. And I see someone's hand raised. I don't know if we can unmute, or did you have a question in the chat? Let's see if we can you unmute yourself? Yes.
Yes, I can. So my question is, with the first option, if mom does not have a stable employment, can we just put like, oh, so will not file and just continue?
Right. So that would
Okay.
be how it would be with the income. And the parent would just report that they do not have any income, right? So they didn't file taxes. And really, if you don't make over a certain amount, you're not required to file anyway. So there will be people that did file, but they just didn't make enough money to do that. So again, they just say, no, they're not going to have any income to report. Makes it really easy for the student. Now, the financial aid office may still ask them some questions, but they'll be able to answer the questions they're going to ask them once they understand the scenario a little bit more. It makes it easier for them to just submit the FAFSA, though, that way. Very good. Let's go on to the next one. So one of the next one is Yolanda's preparing to attend UNCW. She's in the middle of completing her FAFSA, but she got to the question that asked how many people are in college, right? So she's the youngest of 3 siblings. She already has 1 sister who graduated from college. 1 is attending Meredith. Her mom is a full-time student at East Carolina. What's the number of family members that Yolanda would indicate as attending college in her household on the FAFSA? I see most of you have answered that. We can go ahead to the answer to this one too. One is, so this one is true. So she would just put 2 because the 2 individuals would be, of course, Yolanda and her sister who's at Meredith. Currently with the FAFSA, you do not include a parent who is in college, even though they may be a full-time student and also have financial aid themselves. They would not be included as a college student in the household, just the siblings. We'll go on to the next one. So Craig's mom and dad live together in the same house in Raleigh. Although they never legally married, Craig's mom provides over 50% of support for him and claims him an exemption on her tax return. Craig is preparing to submit the FAFSA to NC State, and he includes both parents' financial information. Will NC State and the government accept both parents' information? Why or why not? So think about this one. And we kind of answered this one a little bit in one of the earlier scenarios. Should he include both parents' information or not? Okay. Yeah. We'll go on to the answer for this one too. So yes, in fact, he does put both of them in. They live under the same roof. One of the things the federal government has got a little bit, more savvy about the fact that everybody's not married that's living together. And so people were getting away with, oh, they're not married, so we don't have to include that other person's information. So now, of course, they don't have to be married if they're living in the same household. They do have to report that other parent's information. So that's very true. So this one is probably a common one that you might kind of come across it around this time. So Marissa's been unaccompanied youth by parents for probably 3 months. She's been residing at various friends' houses. Her teachers and her classmates at her local high school have no idea that she doesn't have a place to stay, or that she's been staying with friends, and she hasn't felt comfortable sharing it with anyone. So this is the first time you've heard it. How would you help her when it comes to dependency status as far as the FAFSA is concerned, knowing that she's under 24 and they're going to, of course, initially ask her for parent information? What would you advise her to do when it comes to the FAFSA? Yep. I see Molly put in the answer here, which is right. So we'll go home. Let's go into the answer one. So she'll technically be ultimately classified as an independent student. So when she fills out the FAFSA, of course, right before the parent information, there are some exceptions to the rule. And so one of the things they ask them a series of questions. And one of those questions are you an unaccompanied youth or homeless? So she can just answer, yes, that is me. And it will skip the parent section of the FAFSA.
Yeah.
What you'll need to know though with this is that the financial aid office will ask for documentation. So whenever a student is under 24 and they answer any of those scenarios, the student definitely needs to be checking their email address that they put on their FAFSA or that they submitted to the colleges, because there will be some follow-up questions from the college that, yes, we saw that you said that you were homeless, unaccompanied youth, but we may need to see some documentation. There may be something they ask for from you. But yes, in this situation, she could be independent and do the application without parent information. Let's say someone asked, and there's a question in here and say, in this situation, if the parent is deceased and the student does not have a guardian, and I can't see what that, let me see the whole thing before I move on. Right, so in the situation, if the parent is deceased and the student does not have a guardian, they can just say no to parent information. That's right. So before they just even start answering questions about that, it ends right there. So just know that's an option. It just prompts more documentation from the college. So I always tell counselors, don't stress out about a lot of these scenarios too. Just click no, we're not going to provide parent information. The college will then deal with the paperwork that's needed and what needs to happen from there. So if you don't want to get too deep into what's going on with them. So let's say Michael is a senior in high school and he plans to graduate early. So he's going to graduate in December. He's going to start at Central Piedmont in the spring. So which FAFSA should he complete as far as him graduating early and starting in the spring? Which FAFSA should he do? Yeah. I see a lot of you are very smart. Yep. Go ahead and give him the answer to this, just so we'll all know. So for this one, he has to do the current FAFSA that's out there now. So the 2021-22, he has to do that. If he's planning to also go to classes again in the fall, you also should advise him to do the one for 22-23. So essentially they'll be doing two FAFSAs. They ask for different year kind of information. The 21-22 one will ask for 2019 information. And then the current FAFSA will ask for 2020, but they would need to do, be sure that you're advising them to do two different FAFSAs, because the one they fill out for the 21-22 will end June 30th. So they'll need to do that new one for the fall. That's a great one there. So then we'll see Elsa. Elsa's 17-year-old mother of a baby to be, Dora. She's applying for college for next fall. Elsa will still be living at home though. So her parents will be paying for childcare for her baby, groceries for both of them. When Elsa completes the FAFSA, will she be considered an independent or a dependent student? So by the time she starts fall, Dora will be here. What do you think? That's right. I see Julie and Molly. Yep. And that's actually correct. Let's go on to the answer for this one. So she would still be considered dependent. So we know that one of the exceptions to the rule says that if you have a child that you're that does start the independent kind of conversation. However, the other part of that is that they have to be providing over 50% of the support for that child. So just having a child does not make them independent. They have to be able to show that they're providing financially over 50% of the child. Because she's still going to be living at home, her parents are paying for daycare, they're doing all of the kind of financial things for this child, she still will be considered a dependent. Now, if that situation starts to change, then obviously she can appeal with the financial aid office to become independent. But with the current scenario, she would still ultimately be considered a dependent student. Good. So we'll go on to the next one. So Maya starts to complete the FAFSA in October. Maya's father unfortunately passed away in February of this year. And this is a common scenario that unfortunately I'm starting to hear a lot. I don't know if it has anything to do with the current climate, but I'm starting to hear a lot of students who say that their parent passed away earlier this year. So in 2020, her mother and father filed a joint return. So you know, on the current FAFSA, they're asking for 2020 information, but the parent passed away earlier this year. She's not quite sure how to complete the income information on the FAFSA. How do you advise her when it comes to putting income information on the FAFSA because they're asking for 2020 information? Mm-hmm. That's right. And Kiera, I did see your answer. Yeah. So most of you kind of have this. Let's go on to let's see what the answer is so you can kind of understand. So when the student does the FAFSA, it's asking for 2020 information. There's two options for this really. What I usually try to advise parents and what financial aid officers are going to tell you is that the mother could fill out the information with just her information. So she would take her 2020 tax return and take off the father's information from that tax return. Normally, this may require that mother to get like a blank tax return just to put her information in there. What I've heard and what I know happens, sometimes it's easy to do that. Sometimes it's difficult depending on how they file, but they could submit it with just the mother's information. If it's difficult for them to separate the income that way, then what they can absolutely do is just contact the financial aid office. So again, as someone mentioned in the chat, you would report the 2020 taxes with the father's information on there, but then contact the financial aid office of the colleges that the student sent the information to say what has happened, and then they can fill out sort of a special circumstances form to explain what happened. And then the financial aid office can go in and take off information. But if the parent, again, feel like they're comfortable to do that, they can do that themselves and take off the father's information. But it really does depend on their level of comfort and if they feel like they can do it that way. This is something common. So unfortunately, it happens more than what we think. So definitely kind of keep that in mind. They will contact the financial aid office. And then Lynn was part of the North Carolina foster care system since she was 5 years old. Now that she's turned 18, she's aged out of foster care. She had plans to attend the first time at Elizabeth City State. She's completing her FAFSA. What will her dependency status be when she fills out her FAFSA? It's very good. So I see a lot of you are good. Some of you are really good. Let's go ahead. So Lynn will be classified as an independent student on the FAFSA. So of course the question asks if at any time since you turned 13, were you in foster care? And so she would answer yes to that. And then that would again omit parent information from being required to be put on the FAFSA. So once they answer yes to any of those scenarios right before parent information, it omits that parent information from coming to them. And I don't know if this was our last scenario. If it is, I'm going to give you guys a chance to ask some scenarios, because again, I know there's lots. Having worked in it before, I know that there are lots of scenarios. Does anybody have a scenario that they wanted to ask that we didn't kind of touch on or that you dealt with that you kind of want some clarification on. And a big one, I don't know if anybody here, a big one that I will say as one as is pulling up his, is that you do know with the parents, obviously if when a big one that we get a question that I'm sure you get a lot is students whose parents are separated or divorced. The student, technically the answer is they're putting the parent that they're living with 51% of the time. But there are some students who really do live with their one parent 1 week or the next parent next week. If it's truly 50-50, the student can choose either parent. So initially the role is 51% of the time, but if it's truly 50-50, the student would choose either parent. And so that's up to the student to choose. We tell people not to advise people. You're not a financial advisor. They're going to ask you, should I put my information on, should I choose mine because my income is lower? That's not your job to be like a one, but you definitely want to kind of help guide them in the right way. But this, whichever parent that they choose to put on the FAFSA form. So, and I don't know if there were any questions that came in the chat. Let me check the chat before we turn this over. So my question is about how does RDS with the homeless student with no guardian? Not sure if maybe you can answer this, but maybe what was this? But maybe someone can help. So with RDS, it's going to be different. They still have to go through the RDS system. RDS is going to try in as many ways as it can to give the student a decision with the information that they have. If they are not able to, or if they get an error, or if it says that they're not a student, in-state student for tuition purposes, they have the option to do that reconsideration or that appeal so they can actually talk to a person and explain their situation. But the system is set up to deal with scenarios like that. So again, depending on how they answer a question, it's going to try to gear them to the right place to get the answers that it needs to make a decision. But if it doesn't, the student has the option to do a reconsideration or an appeal to be able to explain their situation more. But the system is set up to answer that type of question. Let's see, in a case of like scenario 2, if a student has a no parent contact and mom doesn't file taxes, if verification asks for a non-filing letter, can the student request it on the parent's behalf? They can request it on the parent's behalf. At some point though, and this will be part of it, the student will definitely need the parent's signature, at some time. So even again, if they are able to catch them that 1 day a week or whenever it is that they see them, they would at some point need that parent's signature, but they can request it on their parent's behalf. They can do that.
Thank you so much, Tamika, for helping us with all those tricky scenarios. So we're going to move on quickly to DACA undocumented and mixed status families. I know that maybe this is a summary for some of you. Maybe these are situations new to you. So our hope is just to give you enough information and then kind of move forward from here. So specifically, let's concentrate on DACA undocumented and mixed status families. So Mariana is in the process of applying to adjust her status in the United States. Is she eligible to complete FAFSA? And so this is something that I get questions like this every day with different statuses. So what do you guys think? What do you guys think? She is in the process of adjusting her status. So this has to do with eligibility requirements. Okay, so I'm seeing in the chat, I don't think so, not yet, and you guys are correct. So FAFSA is really, really strict in terms of those that are eligible to receive financial aid. Usually what I tell the students, it's someone who is a citizen, permanent resident, or non-eligible non-citizen. That could be someone who has received asylum, refugee, or some sort of other status. I put on the bottom of the page a helpful resource that I'm always have nearby, which is the eligible statuses for FAFSA, and that's really, really handy. So you can find those on the resources when they share those back to you. So because the student, it is in the process, therefore they're not eligible to receive state or federal financial aid. And the same thing happens with the state as well. So let's move on. Camila is a US citizen, but her parents do not have a social security number. Instead, they have a IT number. So what considerations should we think about when we are completing FAFSA? And I know some of you guys have worked with some of this. Okay. And Brooke, I'm gonna be paying attention to that question that you sent. I'm gonna answer in a moment, okay? So keep getting those questions there. All right, you guys are pros on this. So what we're gonna do is a few things. So the first thing we're gonna do with parents that don't have a security number, number one, we just remind them that students that are eligible to receive financial aid, regardless of their parent status, are still able to receive financial aid. I know there's a myth in our communities that they don't. We will be using parent information. And so the way that we're gonna handle parents that don't have a security number, number one, they're not gonna be able to create an FSA ID, which is fine. The student will create the FSA ID. We won't be able to use the data retrieval tool because we won't be able to create that FSA ID. Therefore, they're gonna have to insert the information manually, which is, something that we should be doing anyways, just double checking to make sure that the information transpire correctly. We're gonna enter zeros for their social security number. We are never going to put an IT number for FAFSA. And I know some people get confused because in RDS, we do allow the IT numbers in the FAFSA because it's a federal form. We don't, it's zeros. They may get a message. And so this message for error will make some students nervous, and just make sure that it's the correct way. Just let them know that is the correct way. Keep going. They may have to re-enter a few times because it's saying like, are you sure? Like kind of the FAFSA is saying, are you sure it's zeros? And then we're just moving on. The student needs to make sure they submit the form. And that's a common error. Students don't submit the form. And then they're going to print the signature page and literally sign it and mail it to FAFSA. I did put in the resource a information for those students that have parents without social security numbers, so you can navigate and help them navigate step by step. Basically, my own personal recommendation is that they take it to the post office so that they can get a tracking number, because what happens is sometimes we send those signature pages and we just never hear about it. So I do like when students bring me information about tracking. I submitted this 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. That way we can ask FAFSA what's going on. Let's move on. So Mario is in the process of preparing to complete FAFSA, but he realizes that his parents have not filed taxes in previous years. What can Mario do? So let me see. I'm intrigued about what you guys have to say about this. So he's gonna need tax information, but parents don't file. So what should Mario do? What do you guys think? There's different answers for this question, so I'm just gonna give you that. Okay. So I'm seeing the right type of information here. Someone is asking, will they not file because they don't have enough income, or like what is the reason that they're not filing? Someone said, go ahead and complete FAFSA and put not yet file or will not file, and they will be selected for verification. So those are really good answers. So I think, okay. So Mario, I think I put Maria here, but Mario can complete the FAFSA without the tax information. Now, we do have to realize that the IRS has certain threshold for incomes. And so we just have to realize that if they don't need to file, then of course they don't need those taxes. But if they're above those thresholds, the financial aid office may require them to file taxes. And they do have the IT number to file taxes if they don't have a security number. So this is a big one. If they're required to file taxes, they will most likely be asked by the financial office to do so. Okay? I always tell them to consult with a tax professional. I always tell them to be ready for the student, because if they don't submit what they need, the student might not be able to receive financial aid. And they're pretty strict on this. I have seen before financial aid offices being super strict about this requirement. Okay. All right. The next scenario, Marta is a undocumented parent and does not meet qualifications for the Parent Plus loan. But Tito, he needs additional money to go to school, and he meets all the other requirements for financial aid. Is there anything that Tito can do? So the parent is undocumented. Tito is eligible to receive financial aid, but the parent does not qualify for the Parent Plus. What do you guys think about this one? I think my friend Tamika mentioned something earlier that may be helpful here. Oh, you guys are okay. All right, so you guys are mentioning really good things, scholarships, you're mentioning payment plans. Something else that that can be done is Tito has the opportunity to share that information with the financial aid office and see if that if he may be eligible to receive some sort of professional judgment or some sort of scholarship from the institution, because what happens is in some institutions that can be considered extenuating circumstance for a professional judgment. Now, it depends on the school and their policies, but most likely, you know, it's not Tito's fault that the parent is not able to qualify for financial aid. So sometimes they're able to increase those limits. And they might, you know, they might need something from Tito explaining that circumstance. Like it could even be as easy as sending an email or some sort of additional document. So don't forget about that. And also I mentioned the forgivable education loans for service, because this is something that sometimes our students don't forget. All right, let's move on into you are helping a DACA or undocumented student apply for financial aid. This is really common scenario. Can they submit a FAFSA? And I'm intrigued to see what you guys have to say. Can they submit a FAFSA if they have DACA or they are undocumented right now in North Carolina? I see some sad faces about DACA students are not considered eligible for financial aid, and that is correct. And also undocumented students, and it is very sad that the students have to pay out-of-state tuition. So this is how we are going to handle this. So DACA and undocumented students are not able to receive federal or state funding. For the state funding, this is a North Carolina law, and it might change. It might be a little bit different in the future. So just keep that in mind. Now, there's nothing that is going to prevent a DACA student from completing an online FAFSA, but I would not recommend this because students would not be eligible to receive federal or state financial aid. However, a lot of times schools need to determine their EFC. So I would only encourage a student to complete if the school is asking them to complete it. Like I said, there's nothing preventing a DACA student to do so. Now with the undocumented student, they don't have that option because they don't have a social security number. Sometimes some schools will ask them to fill a paper form, or sometimes schools will ask them to fill their own forms. You can think of, like for example, Meredith. Meredith has their own financial aid form where a student is able to share all that financial aid information. Some schools even have what is called a FAFSA filer form. And it could be even as simple as just a form, but not all schools have these forms. So contacting the financial aid office and talking to them about how to handle DACA and undocumented students. Now, I do try to connect those students to scholarships that are open for them. I share a lot of them through CFNC, also through the Society of Hispanic Professionals, also through Latinx Ed. They have some scholarships as well, a listing of scholarships. So we're always thinking about what ways can they maximize the time in high school and minimizing the cost of college. I always think about creative ways to help these students, for example, sponsorships through the community college system. I think about dual enrollment and college credit through AP or CLEP exams, anything that can help the student move forward and minimize the cost of college. We're gonna continue. Noel has been selected for verification and he has been required to submit some documentation for their undocumented parents. So let's keep in mind that this is a topic where a lot of our families are still fearing about the FAFSA form, what it means, where it's going. So just making sure we explain that it is a form that is used for educational purposes, that the information is sent to the schools. Let's reassure Noel that, that like I said, this is used for financial aid purposes. Answer all the questions as possible. And if the parents are not able to provide certain documentation, they should contact the financial aid office and see if they have alternate documentations that they can provide. So a lot of times the financial aid office have flexibilities in terms of the type of documentation that they can accept on behalf of the student. I'm gonna check the chat quickly. And so, yeah, you guys are commenting some great scholarships. And yes, any scholarship that you can think about will be helpful. Also, there are other states offering financial aid for undocumented DACA students. And so that is a real concern that we have here in the state, that our students are having to go elsewhere to be able to receive in-state tuition. So hopefully, hopefully these students can receive at some point in the future some help. Let's move on into our contact information, just in case you do have some other scenarios that you would like to chat with us. A lot of times we have to put our brains together and think through some of these scenarios. My colleague Tamika and I always like to brainstorm, and for us it's fun to just figure out how to best serve the student. But remember that we are just giving them not professional advice. We are just giving them some ideas on how to file the form. They should always contact the financial aid office from the schools that they are interested, because they will be the professionals accepting the forms. And so we always try to work with them just to make sure that the student understand what the requirements are for that particular school. So if there's nothing else before we move into the big group, Tamika, is there anything that you would like to mention, or anyone else have any other questions or comments or concerns?
The financial aid offices are definitely there. I know it's a busy time. Do understand though, for them, you guys have like a large caseload at your high school. They have thousands of students in their caseload, and typically there's only about 15 to 20 people in a financial aid office. So they are trying their best to be sure that they're getting back to emails and phone calls, but be patient, keep trying, because they are a few people dealing with 10, 15, 20,000 students. So be patient with them as they're trying to process, and you're trying to help the students that you're working with.
Absolutely. And it's always a pleasure when we get to work with you guys and think through those scenarios. A lot of times, they can be very tricky situations. So sometimes we have to put ourselves and think together through those scenarios. So certainly appreciate the little time that we got today, and hopefully it's not the last time. And I know it won't be. I recognize a lot of your names that we chat on social media as well. So let's keep connected with each other through social media. Let's keep connected each other and try to support these students through those tricky situations that they might arise as they're completing FAFSA. So thank you so much, you guys, for your time today.